Moon Palace, Chapter 27. Last night, the weather report stated that the temperature would be falling into the teens. Yuan requested Mei Ling to bring his winter clothes to work. She agreed. Feeling awkward, packing his things in trash bags, his luggage was at his mother's place where he was staying. She packed most of his sweaters, thermals, jeans, shoes, along with all his underwears and socks. The rest were too old and ripped to keep. He probably won't even notice they were missing, since she bought and arranged most of his clothes. She sat on the bed staring at the empty drawers and his side of the closet. Would there be any chance that he'd ever be allowed to come back? She thought, then stood up and moved the bags into the trunk of her car. The temperature dropped drastically in the garage. It must be around 30 degrees. Mei Ling thought for a moment and decided she did not hate him enough to want him to show up for work without a coat and get sick. She got dressed and headed to her mother-in-law's place. It has been years since she paid a visit to Mrs. Li's home, either because she and Yuan were busy working or Mrs. Li really did not invite her in recent years. Something she never did consider a loss. Yuan, however, would pay his mother a visit weekly to bring her groceries. The streets were wet on account of the rainstorm throughout the night, followed by light flurries just when Mei Ling pulled out of her driveway. Despite the blurry view from the poor weather and years of not visiting, she still managed to find her place with ease. She noticed a Land Rover parked in Mrs. Li's driveway, and next to it was a Honda Civic. Could it be a nurse visiting her? Mei Ling rang the front doorbell, then heard a commotion from the other side of the door. She heard muffled voices, and footsteps approached. Yuan opened the front door, just wide enough to show his head and his torso. He seemed surprised seeing his wife. Mei Ling greeted him and said, "I came to bring you clothes as requested. They're in—" Mei Ling stopped, just as she peered over Yuan's shoulder, and pushed the door wide open, scraping his arm. She took a couple of steps into the house, and an overwhelming sensation rushed over her. She could not breathe, and her heart pounded hard. She could not believe whom she saw, and what's worse, she could not believe that this person carried a huge belly. Mrs. Li came out of the kitchen and noticed Mei Ling. For a woman with many words, she did not speak. Instead, she stood next to Moy and gestured her to step away. Mrs. Li approached Mei Ling and asked her to sit down. For the very first time, Mei Ling's eyebrows furrowed in front of her mother-in-law. Her face was flustered with fury, which stunned the mother, who soon stepped back. Feeling protective, Yuan immediately pushed Mei Ling out of the door and stepped outside himself in an attempt to explain what his wife just saw. And before he could utter a word, Mei Ling glared into his eyes and slapped his face hard. She then rushed to pop the trunk, threw out the trash bags onto the grass, got into her car, and drove away. Moon Palace, Chapter 28. Statistics have shown that when a Chinese restaurant that made good sales year-round would do particularly well in winter. Thus, it did not take long for Moon Palace to be in the process of exchanging owners as soon as the for sale ad placed in a local Chinese newspaper. For the sake of legality, neither Yuan or Mei Ling was involved in the negotiation. A real estate agent who was hired by a law firm that represented both parties was the one handling the process. It was in the middle of March, 3 months after Mei Ling filed the divorce proceedings. By law, they both could appeal for a period of trial separation. Neither of them did. One was too infuriated to do so, and the other was too proud. Around the same time, Mei Ling wanted the house to be placed on the market as well, but the agent advised her to wait till spring, where buyers were more motivated to make a purchase. It was a difficult time for the owners, as well as the staff members. Under the advice of their lawyers, Mei Ling and Yuan agreed to come to the restaurant on alternative days to avoid each other. If they have anything to discuss about any issues, they would have the lawyers to build the contact. As for the staff members, they knew their days at Moon Palace were numbered. As soon as the restaurant was for sale, they already started to look for jobs elsewhere. And when the early spring arrived, Jose already left, so did Shuming. The only ones stayed were Lao Tong, Peng, and Wei Long. Yuan did think about letting Wei Long go, but when Jose quit, he was glad Wei Long stayed, but curious why he did, since the future of working here was grim. By the end of April, Moon Palace was under new management. Lao Tong was requested to stay to keep the normal flow of the business. Peng was asked to stay as well. Both agreed. But when Wei Long was asked to stay, he declined, stating that his visa would expire within months. This was the news Mei Ling dreaded. "When?" she asked, while sitting in a food court of a mall in the outskirts of the city, about half an hour away, having lunch with Wei Long. He gently caressed Mei Ling's fingertips underneath a set of skylight and did not respond right away. He then let go of her hand and leaned back against a partition and was drawn to the ceiling. He replied, "Next month." "Why didn't you tell me before?" she quivered. "I didn't want to upset you." Mei Ling twirled her cold drink with a straw, watching the ice cubes swirling as they melt. She kissed her hand and covered her lips. She stared at the stone flooring and allowed the noises from the nearby shoppers drowning her mind to stop her from thinking. As if he knew what she was doing, he placed his hand over her other hand that was laying on the table and gently squeezed. He asked, "When will your classes start?" She glanced at him with a slight grin and replied, "This September." He grinned too, thinking he was the one who encouraged her to pursue a degree. He asked, "Would you do me a favor?" "What's that?" "Would you come visit me before the school starts?" "China?" "Yes, my hometown." His eyes gazed at her intently, almost similar to that night on the roof. "Will you?" "What would be the reason?" she quietly asked. "Just because I'm leaving the States does not mean it's over between us. Unless," he grimaced, "that is what you want." Mei Ling shook her head and interlocked her fingers with his.